Most people believe they've done everything right. They saved for decades. They were patient. They didn't touch the money when times got hard. They followed every piece of advice they were ever given. Max out the 401k. Let it grow. Don't panic when the market dips. And then, the moment they finally retire, the moment they take that first withdrawal from the account they built their entire future around, the IRS sends them a bill they never saw coming. Not because they cheated, not because they made a risky bet, but because of a rule so quietly embedded in the U.S. tax code that most financial advisors don't even bring it up until it's already too late. It's called provisional income. And if you've never heard that phrase before, that's exactly the problem. Here's what most people understand about Social Security. You pay into it your whole working life, and when you retire, you get a monthly check. That check, most people assume, is theirs. They earned it. And to a large degree, that's true. But what very few people know, what the government has never gone out of its way to explain, is that depending on how much money you pull from your other retirement accounts, up to 85% of your Social Security benefit can become fully taxable income. Read that again. Up to 85 cents of every dollar the government sends you can be handed right back to them in taxes. Not because you did anything wrong, not because you're wealthy, but because of the way the IRS calculates something called combined income, a formula that adds up your adjusted gross income, any non-taxable interest you earn, and half of your Social Security benefit. Cross a certain threshold, and suddenly your retirement income is taxed in a way most people never planned for. The thresholds themselves are almost insultingly outdated. They were written into law in 1983 and again with a small modification in 1993. They were never indexed to inflation. That means the income levels that once only affected high earners now quietly sweep in millions of middle-class retirees every single year. People who spent their lives living modestly, saving responsibly, doing everything by the book, and they're getting hit by a rule that was never updated to reflect the world they're actually living in. But here's where it gets worse. Because the real problem isn't the rule itself. The real danger is what triggers it. And most people trigger it completely by accident, doing something that feels not just reasonable, but smart. They take money from their IRA. That's it. That's the move that changes everything for millions of retirees. Not a splurge, not a bad investment, just a normal withdrawal from a pre-tax retirement account. The kind of account that financial institutions have been telling you to fund for 30 years. The kind of account where every contribution came with a promise. You'll pay the taxes later, when you're in a lower bracket. What no one told you is that later doesn't just mean a lower rate. It means the withdrawal itself becomes part of that provisional income calculation. It means pulling $10,000 from your IRA in the same year you collect Social Security could push you across a threshold, and suddenly a portion of your benefit that was tax-free yesterday is taxable today. Not just the $10,000, your Social Security too, and it compounds. Because once you cross one threshold, your effective tax rate doesn't just rise, it can spike in a way that tax experts call the torpedo zone. A zone where earning one additional dollar of income can cost you far more than a dollar in taxes. Where the math stops making sense. Where the system that was supposed to reward your discipline ends up penalizing it. Now I want you to think about someone specific, a man named Robert. He spent 34 years as a high school history teacher in Ohio. He never made extraordinary money. He maxed out his contributions when he could, skipped vacations some years, drove the same car for a decade. He retired at 67 with $310,000 in his traditional IRA, a Social Security benefit of roughly $1,900 a month, and a pension that covered his basic bills. In his first year of retirement, he needed a new roof, $18,000. He didn't have it in cash, so he did what seemed logical. He went to his IRA, the account he'd spent his whole career building, and he pulled the money out. What happened next is something Robert is still paying for 3 years later. And the worst part? His financial advisor saw it coming. His advisor knew. Had known for 2 years, actually. Had even mentioned it once, briefly, in a meeting the year before Robert retired. Something about being careful with IRA withdrawals and watching the thresholds. But it was buried in a 40-minute conversation about asset allocation, and Robert didn't ask follow-up questions because he didn't know what he didn't know. He nodded. He moved on. And when the roof needed replacing, the IRA felt like the obvious answer. That single $18,000 withdrawal pushed his provisional income over the threshold. 85% of his Social Security became taxable. His effective tax rate jumped in a way he hadn't budgeted for. And because he hadn't planned his withholding correctly, he owed money at tax time, money he then had to pull from the IRA again to cover, which pushed his income higher the following year. One decision, 3 years of consequences, a loop he's still trying to escape. Robert is not unusual. He is, statistically, exactly who this rule was designed to catch. According to the Social Security Administration, more than 40% of Social Security recipients now pay federal taxes on their benefits. In 1984, the year after these rules first took effect, that number was closer to 10%. The thresholds didn't move. Incomes did. Inflation did. Retirement account balances grew. And quietly, without any announcement, millions of middle-income retirees crossed into territory that was originally meant only for the wealthy. A 2023 analysis from the Senior Citizens League found that retirees are losing an average of over $1,000 per year in purchasing power because of the way these tax rules interact with fixed incomes. That's not a dramatic Wall Street collapse. That's a slow, silent erosion, a leak in the foundation that most people don't notice until the floor gives way. And it's not just teachers from Ohio. There's the couple in Arizona, both retired nurses who decided to convert a portion of their traditional IRA to a Roth in what seemed like a smart, forward-thinking move. Their financial planner had recommended it for years. What wasn't fully mapped out was the timing. The conversion created taxable income in the same year they both began collecting Social Security. One smart decision, poorly timed, cost them nearly $6,000 in taxes they hadn't anticipated. There's the retired contractor in Michigan who inherited his father's IRA at 68, an event entirely outside his control, and suddenly found himself with a required minimum distribution that pushed him past the threshold. He didn't choose to take that money. The law required it. And the IRS taxed his Social Security because of it anyway. These are not edge cases. These are the ordinary mechanics of a system that was built in an era most retirees no longer recognize. So what do you actually do about it? The answer isn't panic. The answer is sequencing. The single most powerful shift a retiree can make is understanding the order in which they pull from different types of accounts and planning that order years before retirement, not in the moment a roof caves in or a medical bill arrives. If you have a mix of traditional pre-tax accounts, Roth accounts, and taxable investment accounts, the sequence in which you draw from them can mean the difference between a tax-efficient retirement and a decade of unnecessary overpayment. Roth accounts, because they hold after-tax money, don't count toward provisional income. Taxable brokerage accounts, depending on the nature of the gains, can be managed carefully. The goal is to keep your combined income below the thresholds or to reduce your pre-tax balances before Social Security begins, so the withdrawals you take later land in a lower, safer zone. This is called income architecture, and it's not a product anyone sells you. It's a strategy, a framework, a way of looking at retirement not as a single moment when you stop working, but as a 15 to 20-year tax management exercise that rewards whoever plans earliest and penalizes whoever waits. The people who avoid the torpedo zone aren't luckier than Robert. They aren't wealthier. In many cases, they have less. What they have is a plan that was built around this specific danger, one that mapped out their income year by year, accounted for the thresholds, and made sure that every dollar drawn from every account was drawn in the right order, at the right time, in the right amount. The rule itself isn't going away. Congress has shown no serious interest in updating thresholds that have been frozen since before most smartphones existed. The burden of navigating this system falls entirely on you, which means the most important thing you can do right now, regardless of how close or far you are from retirement, is understand where your income will come from, how much of it will be visible to the IRS, and whether the accounts you've been told to build are quietly setting a trap for the moment you finally need them most. Here is the one rule worth remembering above all others. The account that grows the fastest is not always the account you should touch first. Retirement isn't just about accumulation, it's about withdrawal strategy. And the people who learn that difference before they retire don't just pay less in taxes, they protect the life they actually worked for. Don't be Robert 3 years into the problem. Be the person who saw it coming.